Hello, I'm Burt Lancaster. This is the final episode of The Unknown War, the war on the Eastern Front during World War II. The Unknown War was also an Allied war. The Americans, the British, the French, Poles, Czechs, others fought to destroy Hitler's Germany and his dream of world supremacy. For the Russians, the victory had a special meaning. This was a war in which at least 20 million Russians died, maybe more. There was scarcely a Soviet family who did not suffer at least one loss from the day the Nazis first attacked until the day the war finally ended. Ordinary men and women gave their lives to save their homeland. Here at the Kremlin Wall in Moscow is the grave of the unknown soldier. Countless mothers and widows bring flowers here to pay tribute to their dead. Our story, a soldier of the unknown war.
Wherever the Soviet soldiers passed in Eastern Europe, they are remembered. They rest among their comrades in public parks, at quiet crossroads throughout the countries of Eastern Europe. They lay down their lives by the tens of thousands, some known, many unknown. $120,000 in the liberation of Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Austria. In Poland, 600,000. Over 140,000. In Berlin, in 3 weeks, 100,000. $1,418 days of war were over. Every day a bitter one for the Soviets. Relief and joy spread across the world. Moscow. New York. London. Paris. The Allies celebrated the deliverance they had won. Russian soldiers came home to a ruined land. Nazis devastated 1,710 Soviet cities and towns, 70,000 villages. Factories, a total of $485 billion worth of damage.
The Unknown War will be back after this. Soldiers of the Unknown War.
The Victory Parade on Red Square. The veterans of the Ukraine, Stalingrad, Dnieper, Budapest, Berlin. The galaxy of Soviet marshals. Vasilevsky, Konya, Tolpukin, Govorov, Melanovsky, Meretskov, Chuikov, and the young General Leonid Brezhnev. Stalin asked Zhukov, "Have you forgotten how to ride a horse?" Zhukov said he could still ride. "Thank God," Stalin said, "because you will have to take the salute at the Victory Parade." Rokossovsky commanded the parade.
Для парада победы построен!
were from every service: Army, Air Force, the fleets, the partisans. They had come from every battlefield, taking the long road home. The same red square in the snow of 1941, they had paraded in a desperate hour. Then they had marched straight to the battle lines, only 40 miles outside of Moscow. Later, in 1945, they were armed with superior weapons, supplied in plenty from the new factories built during the war in the Urals and Siberia. The standards of Hitler's proud divisions were now in their keeping. In front of Lenin's tomb, at the foot of the Kremlin walls, while the Soviet leaders watched, they degraded them, the banners that had terrorized Europe. The banners of Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. It had lasted just 12 years. Nuremberg at the beginning. Nuremberg at the end. But in the meantime, the ruin of other cities. London, Rotterdam, Warsaw. And last, when the wheel came full circle, Berlin.
The Unknown War will continue in a moment. Soldiers of the Unknown War.
It was only fitting that the trial of the Nazi war criminals should take place in Nuremberg. The Palace of Justice had escaped destruction, and was under Allied guard. So was the Nuremberg jail. November 1945, all were assembled. Prisoners, judges, prosecutors from the US, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, defense attorneys. Witnesses spoke from the grave. Nazi scheme of things, their concentration camps could have covered the world. Charges including the killing of 20 million civilians and prisoners of war, and the slaughter of 6 million Jews, and the murder of innocents. in the Nazi concentration camps was as efficient as German thoroughness could make it. Everything of any value was recycled. Hair was cut off before they went to the gas chambers. The bales were sent to rope mills and mattress factories. They pried the gold fillings from the mouths of the dead, sent them to the Reichsbank, and squandered the bullion to spill more blood. Schacht's safe was full of wedding rings, taken from the fingers of the murdered. The Nazis used human skin for briefcases and gloves. Danzig, they had a factory for turning dead human bodies into soap.
The unknown war will continue in a moment. Soldiers of the unknown war.
Justice Robert H. Jackson of the United States Supreme Court summed up the case for the prosecution.
In the prisoner's dock sit 20-odd broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led, almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. It is hard now to perceive in these miserable men as captives the power by which, as Nazi leaders, they once dominated much of the world and terrified most of it. Merely as individuals, their fate is of little consequence to the world. What makes this inquest significant is that these prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust. We will show them to be living symbols of racial hatreds, of terrorism and violence, and of the arrogance and cruelty of power. They are symbols of fierce nationalisms and of militarism, of intrigue and war-making, which have embroiled Europe generation after generation, crushing its manhood, destroying its men, and impoverishing its life. That any tenderness to them is a victory and an encouragement to all the evils which are attached to their names. Civilization can afford no compromise with the social forces which would gain renewed strength if we deal ambiguously or indecisively with the men in whom these forces now precariously survive.
But the sickness lingers wherever the neo-Nazis flaunt their symbols. There are many who remember that Hitler had small beginnings. French call it a yearning for the mud. Others call it decadence, nostalgia for the darker side of man. The reality was different.
Sondern dass es hart sein kann, dass es den Unwillen des menschlichen Lebens Widerstand zu leisten war. Und ihr müsst euch in der Jugend dafür.
The reality of Nazism was this. President Kennedy said,
"No nation in the history of battle ever suffered more than the Soviet Union in the Second World War. At least 20 million lost their lives. Countless millions of homes and families were burned or sacked. A third of the nation's territory, including 2/3 of its industrial base, was turned into a wasteland. A loss equivalent to the destruction of this country east of Chicago."
The reality of Nazism is this, a generation later. Its legacy is grief. Of the victory, every year, everywhere in the Soviet Union, the morning turns magically to joy. Visited Moscow on the 30th anniversary of V-Day.
spite of our differences, we must recognize that the overriding objective must be peace on this earth, prevent the disaster that could come from another conflict. We must be optimistic, because the future of mankind depends upon the ability of the leaders of the Soviet Union and of the United States to work out our differences in such a way that we can be constructive and not destructive. We can bring hope to people all over the world rather than the disaster. I'm an optimist. I'm satisfied that it can and will be achieved. The road towards peace will be followed, and we can be hopeful to count upon agreements which will be vitally important to the welfare of mankind. I've had the privilege of meeting Mr. Brezhnev now on 3 occasions, 74, 75, and 76. And I'm utterly convinced that his ambition as a leader of the Russian people now, the Soviet Union, is to improve relations with the United States and the other nations of the West, and then to assure peace. He's told me he never wanted to see his children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, go through the horrors that he went through and his generation. And he wants peace.
The Unknown War will be back after this. Soldiers of the Unknown War.
They talk of old battles. Stalingrad, Kursk, Sevastopol, the skies above Belarusia. They sing of the battles without names. They are the soldiers of the unknown war. Among them, Leonid Brezhnev, with old comrades from the battles in the Crimea. They did not see themselves as heroes. They had a cause, to save their country and their loved ones. They just kept to the road, and it brought them to victory.
All my roads are dust and gone. All my comrades are scattered to the wind, trying to remember what I can't forget. All my roads are dust and gone.
My roads are dust and gone.
All my roads are dust and gone.
My roads are dust and gone.
Yet my tomorrow are waiting to begin. Build a wider highway, make a longer road. All my roads are dust and gone.
My roads are dust and gone.
All my roads are dust and gone.
My roads are dust and gone.
Now my brothers lie beneath the falling rain. If I had a shoulder, I'd lean on it, 'cause all my roads are dust and gone.
My roads are dust and gone.
All my roads are dust and gone. And gone.
Their voices still speak. Not long ago, some school children in Belarusia found a spent cartridge. There was a note inside. There were 3 of us left out of the battalion, and now there are 2. We held the defenses at the Berezina River. My buddy Yasha Bruchkin is dead. I'm all alone. But the tanks keep coming. Soon I'll be gone too. Friends, avenge us. We never took a step back. We fought to the last. A snapshot. There are tens of thousands like it. Friends, comrades. None can know who among them lived and which ones died. They are the anonymous ones of the unknown war. Leonid Brezhnev and his great-granddaughter Galya.
In history, there has been no other war so terrible, so bloody and so destructive as was the Second World War, unleashed by the Nazi aggressors. For the Soviet people, it was a great patriotic war. They fought it for the sake of the freedom of independence of their socialist homeland, for the sake of the salvation of Europe and indeed the whole world from fascist enslavement. That war carried away the lives of 20 million Soviet people. Our people will never forget it.
Не забудет ее никогда.
It will be remembered not only by those who, like myself, went through the flames of war from beginning to end,
Прошел огонь войны от начала до конца.
but also by the new generations whose life began in the post-war years.
В жизнь уже в послевоенные годы. Память об этой войне это для нас призыв к бдительности.
Our memories of that war are for us an appeal for vigilance in respect of the designs and schemes of aggressive forces.
Призыв к неустанной, последовательной борьбе за
And most important, an appeal for an unflagging, consistent struggle for a lasting peace, for an end of the arms race, and for peaceful cooperation between nations. We want the young inhabitants of our planet never to have to go through what our generation went through during the war years.
Довелось пережить нашему поколению в годы войны.
The Belarusian station. They stepped over the threshold of peace. No words, just the language of love. There is another language still in Russia. It is what the flowers say. for their way of life, the soldiers of the unknown war. And above all, they fought for this. They fought so there could be another spring, a time for love, some room for innocence. They died so that others could play, feel the wind, and wonder. They died in their hundreds of thousands, unknown but not forgotten, so that others would have a chance to grow, a chance to seek, to taste the beauty of the earth, and find a way perhaps toward the sun. They died so that a new century could be born.
A retrospective on world-changing events during the 1940s on Crusade in Europe. Now stay tuned for No Time to Say Goodbye on A&E Premieres next.
Learn in war or peace, the games never cease, but still we salute